Terrorism, simply defined, is acts of violence or threats of violence in order to achieve a political objective. In the U.S., there have been many examples of lone wolf terrorists, such as the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, and organized terrorist groups such as the Weather Underground, and please see both of our videos on those subjects. But in the last decade or so, new groups were formed, such as Antifa and Black Lives Matter, who used violence, rioting, arson, assaults, and in a few cases even murder to achieve their objectives. But what was Black Lives Matter? How were they created? What was their purpose? Why were they allowed to continue their rampage of violence? Where did they operate and why? How did the group fall apart? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. In 2013, three radical black organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created #BlackLivesMatter in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin death in Florida. Cullors stated, "My brother's abuse in jail is the reason I co-founded Black Lives Matter. We need reform in LA," which is where she was from growing up poor. She decided that she would get involved in what she perceived as a racial disparity in law enforcement, which actually did have some merit in a few cases. Even before the 2013 homicide case went to trial, we're trying to convict Zimmerman in the court of public opinion, ignoring open facts about the case. In essence, BLM was created based upon a lie, as self-defense was ruled by the jury. But another event would give them more fodder. On August 9, 2014, 18-year-old Michael Brown, a career criminal, was shot and killed by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. And BLM, which has started to grow, used this event and created a false narrative about the event, creating the slogan, "Hands up, don't shoot." Both peaceful protests and violent riots continued for more than a week after the event in Ferguson, with police later establishing a curfew at night. BLM was supported by the mainstream media, already bent left politically, just like in the Trayvon Martin case. They distorted facts and manipulated public opinion. The final investigation by the Ferguson and St. Louis police departments, 40 FBI agents, and attorneys from the Civil Rights Division from the United States Attorney's Office proved that the shooting by Officer Wilson was justified after Wilson answered a robbery call and then confronted Brown and his 22-year-old friend Dorian Johnson. BLM supporters refused to believe the results of the local, state, and federal investigation despite DNA evidence, autopsy report, and reliable eyewitness testimony proving that Brown reached in and struggled with Wilson over his firearm, and they had launched an attack against Wilson and his family. The autopsy on Brown proved that his arms were not raised when the 6 bullets struck after he came after Wilson, and the primary witness, Johnson, had fabricated the story. Others who were not even present gave the same statements, and the case would drag on for several years. The grand jury was called and given evidence from Robert McCulloch, the white St. Louis County prosecutor. On November 24, 2014, McCulloch announced the St. Louis grand jury had decided not to indict Wilson based upon actual evidence. But in 2020, a new St. Louis County prosecutor, Wesley Bell, spent 5 months reviewing the case, considering either manslaughter or murder against Wilson. But given the evidence, he would not charge Wilson with any crime, saying he didn't have the evidence to ethically bring a charge against Darren Wilson. But BLM did not care. Both DAs used integrity and the law, as opposed to bowing to public pressure. The U.S. Department of Justice under Eric Holder at the time, had also concluded that Wilson shot Brown in self-defense. BLM-inspired protests erupted again after the death of George Floyd. Despite the evidence showing that Floyd was not killed by the police, the public pressure and BLM forced local Democrats to pursue the murder charge against Officer Derek Chauvin. Social media and tech giants also financially supported the BLM cause, ignoring the blatant hypocrisy of their basic mantra. BLM's purpose was to address issues of blacks being killed by whites, in particular law enforcement, despite the fact that most police and sheriff departments are in fact multi-ethnic in their organizations, as stated previously. BLM claimed that the police forces nationwide were not diverse enough, leading to white cops killing blacks. In fact, the 2022 report showed that the police officers' workforce in that year was 849,915 people in various capacities, with 20,000 operating as sworn officers, of which 14.2% were women and 85.8% were men. In 2020, 61.2% of full-time sworn officers in local police departments in the United States identified as white males, followed by 11.5% of officers who identified as Hispanic males. Ethnic groups are white, 59.6%, followed by Hispanic or Latino, 18.2%, Black or African American, 13.3%, and unknown at 4.7%, which follows alongside the demographic makeup of the country. The actual medical report prepared by the Chief Medical Examiner, Andrew M. Baker, MD, showed Floyd was positive for cannabinoids, norphenol, methamphetamine, amphetamines, fentanyl, metabolite, and he was COVID-19 positive, all contributing to his death. But facts were irrelevant. Because of this cover-up, the founders of BLM created a crowdfunding organization to solicit funds to help them operate around the country. They raked in tens of millions of dollars supported by high-profile Democrats, with Senator and later VP and presidential candidate Kamala Harris starting a fund to bail BLM and Antifa terrorists out of jails when they were arrested. This resulted in even more crimes around the country, as well as murders. In particular, the shooting death of retired St. Louis police captain David Dorn. His convicted killer, BLM member Stephen Cannon, was given life in prison, and his accomplice and getaway driver, Mark Jackson, was given 5 years. Soon they would have a great ally in George Soros, and see our video on him, who would pour millions of dollars into local, state, and federal elections to see that the most progressive liberals on the ballots were elected. But the BLM hypocrisy was becoming even more apparent since their claim of supporting and protecting black lives ended when it came to black-on-black violence in large liberal-governed cities, especially Chicago, for just one example, where children have a high mortality rate due to the black-on-black gang crime. Not a single Black Lives Matter dollar went to improve or assist the inner cities where blacks were most vulnerable and impoverished despite their public outcry and promises. In essence, they lied and they were frauds. They never even showed up to address the black-on-black crime issue in any city. Federal statistics showed that 93% of blacks were killed by other blacks, and 84% of whites were killed by other whites, especially in high-density urban Democrat-run cities. Now, this is important. As the BLM movement grew, organizers from 18 different cities went back home and developed Black Lives Matter chapters in their communities and towns. BLM Foundation was a member-led global network of more than 40 chapters. As posted on the BLM website, and I'm quoting, "Our members organize and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes." Notice they omitted that they would intervene with regard to black gangs preying upon their own ethnic group. In 2021, it was discovered that Cullors and her associates had taken the money for their cause and purchased several homes during a 5-year period. Critics accused the three women of using Black Lives Matter movement money to enrich themselves. They totally confused their supporters since they identified as Marxists and donated money did not get to other chapters around the country as they went on a spending spree. Colors denied any wrongdoing and defended her actions as an effort to take care of her family and described the criticism as an effort to discredit and harass me and my family by the political right. Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation denied that it had paid for her purchases of real estate and said they had not paid her since 2019, adding that she had only received $120,000 since 2013 for carrying out her work related to the organization. So how did she get all that money? The actual real estate and bank transaction records tell a different story. New York Magazine reported that Colors, Alicia Garza, and Melina Abdullah had purchased a 6,500 square foot home in California in 2020 for $6 million in cash, and a lot more than that was missing from the BLM fund. Colors never made more than $120,000 in the years that she was the organizer as her salary, and the same was true for Garza and Abdullah. Many BLM supporters left the organization, seeing the hypocrisy of their self-professed Marxist dogma and diatribe about helping black citizens being nothing more than propaganda. The home they bought consisted of more than a half a dozen bedrooms and bathrooms, several fireplaces, a soundstage, a pool, and bungalow, in addition to parking for more than 20 cars. All three women denied any misappropriation of funds, but they cannot explain where the money came from, other than saying that it was a collection of donated assets. The request for an IRS audit under the Biden administration, which supported the domestic terror group, went unanswered, just as they never allowed the prosecution of Hunter Biden for tax fraud and tax evasion. The leader of the Minneapolis branch of BLM, Rashad Turner, who appears to be an honorable man, learned firsthand of the corruption and embezzlement of the many millions of dollars that had been donated by liberal entities, especially George Soros. He said that he learned the truth that BLM leadership did not care about saving or improving black lives. They only cared about making money, the old-fashioned way, stealing it, and getting free publicity and paid speaking engagements. But the graft ran even deeper when Colors hired her older brother, Paul, a graffiti artist and founder of Colors Protection LLC, and he received $840,000 from BLM GNF for security and consulting. However, he had no security and consulting experience. Colors defended hiring her brother, saying that registered security firms, which generally hired former police officers, could not be trusted. But, her brother had no law enforcement or security experience. Nepotism at its best. Other BLM activists accused Colors personally of monopolizing and capitalizing our fight. 10 local chapters of the foundation claimed that Colors became their executive director against the will of most chapters and without their knowledge. They claimed that chapter organizers were prevented from influencing the group's direction, had no control over the millions of dollars donated, and that the national organization provided little to no financial support for local chapters since its inception in 2013. Black Lives Matter, despite their public mantra, never gave any money to the families of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, or George Floyd, although attorneys did file lawsuits on behalf of the families. Instigated by their liberal benefactors, BLM rioters rampaged throughout the summer of 2020. But interestingly enough, they only targeted Democrat-operated cities, especially New York City, Minneapolis, Chicago, Portland, and Seattle, where the bailout fund and local governments turned a blind eye to the violence. Damages caused by the 2020 Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests were estimated to cost $2 billion, a number that could still go higher, according to a February 2021 report published on the World Economic Forum's website. Not a single terrorist was arrested charged or prosecuted for a major crime, even when some BLM terrorists were caught throwing Molotov cocktails into buildings and attacking police officers. In Minneapolis, the 3rd Police Precinct was burned down, forcing the occupants to evacuate. The terrorists then poured gasoline and lit more fires, and the few arrested were soon bailed out. Massive looting sprees took place in stores and shops, and after they were picked clean, they were burnt down. In all, around 400 cities were hit in all 50 states. A few were hit several times, and some were actually peaceful protests, but many were violent. And guess what? They were all Democrat locations. Go figure. But once the horrors of terrorism, looting, and arson hit their cities, the hypocrisy of enforcing their own laws and making major arrests would have been too obvious. Most of those protesters arrested were booked not for violent crimes such as arson and assault, but for low-level offenses such as violating curfews, obstructing roadways, carrying open containers other than Molotov cocktails, as well as failure to disperse. In some of these cities, more serious charges were filed as well, however. The Associated Press reported hundreds were charged with burglary and looting as of June 4, 2020, but most were bailed out as usual. In October 2020, researchers writing for the Washington Post analyzed 7,305 protest events and found police made arrests at 5% of them. Only 3.7% of the events involved property damage or vandalism, according to the analysis. The rest were misdemeanors. President Trump, in office at the time, offered federal troops to restore order in several cities, but most liberal mayors and governors refused this offer as that would have only increased the image of stupidity. The local police in most locations were told to stand down. In fact, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, when asked about the hundreds of riots, said, "People are going to do what they are going to do." She had no condemnation at all. Kamala Harris herself praised the rioters, saying, "They're not going to stop. They're never going to stop." And she kept the money coming in to bail out the criminals to travel to other areas and just continue the mayhem. The mainstream media was also in on the scam, with reporters, especially from CNN, standing in front of a torched building claiming that the protests were mostly peaceful. Liberal media was not about to turn on their favorite icon of social justice. The Marxist-driven terrorists knew that conservative locations would have put a rapid stop to their activities, hence only torching their own Democrat inner cities. The great irony is that it ended up destroying many black-owned local businesses and then driving many other businesses out of their cities and even out of their states permanently, thereby increasing poverty and unemployment. Another unintended consequence was law enforcement's departure. The BLM and Progressive Collective also called for the defunding of police departments, which had been undertaken in some liberal locations. The results were very evident and predictable, as fewer police and other first responders were available to address the problems, and even those who were there were under orders not to engage unless absolutely necessary, and they were attacked when they did arrive. As a result, many first responders, police, and firefighters resigned and retired, or most found jobs in more conservative locations willing to hire and respect them. Collins herself resigned from the BLM leadership in May 2021, stating psychological exhaustion from the controversy, stating that she was receiving treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. In 2022, she denied allegations of misusing the donations given to Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, and she entered into mental therapy treatment for depression and anxiety. Well, in the end, the so-called social justice movement, founded upon a lie propelled by progressive supporters and politicians, aided by left-wing media, operated and run by three Marxist hypocrites, was nothing more than a violent, terroristic snatch-and-grab collective who ruined their own cities while their leadership stole the money and lived large. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.